Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to Perspectives. I'm your host, Musa Maguire. One of the topics that we like to deal with often on this show is the idea of dialogue between civilizations. And we want to treat that again today with an expert in this area. Our guest today is Ambassador Mohammed Osama Abdul Muttalib, who's a member of the Egyptian Council for Foreign Affairs. He's also a lecturer of the Faculty of National Defense in the area of crisis management. And your CV in international diplomacy, I think, goes on for pages, so I won't get into that. But I want to say assalamu alaikum and thank you for being here.
Assalamu rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Well, when we talk about holding a dialogue with the other, with people from another culture, another civilization, it has several important meanings and concepts. Is there an agreement on what this means to hold a dialogue with the other? What are the principles of this idea, and what are the goals?
If we go back to our holy book, the Quran, Almighty God says, وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا. It means that we created you in peoples and tribes to know you each other, which means that should be a connection between you, should be a dialogue between you. It means that one should know the other through the dialogue. So it's a principal part of the Islam. Even in the moment of any dispute or any difference in ideas or in views, وَجَادِلْهُمْ بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ, mean that you can argue them with the best way or through dialogue. This means that it should be dialogue too. So it's a principal part of our religion.
When we look at the situations in today's world around which we see a lot of conflict, what would you say the methodology, the best methodology is for initiating the dialogue? Do we need to take an aggressive approach? Do we need to begin with more basic matters? What are some of the strategies we can take in this regard?
To my assessment, the best way is the popular diplomacy, which means that you dialogue with the people. Because what's behind all this big, problem which is happening now is some fanatics, which they're having their own purposes to attack Islam, to destruct Islam, to distort the image of Islam. So we don't like to have a dialogue with this, because these people are minority comparing with the majority of the people, which we should go and speak to them and receive delegations of them to exchange dialogue between each other.
Now, you have a long career in international diplomacy. You mentioned to me before the show that you've served, I think, on 3 continents, unless I lost count. What are some of the lessons you've gained from that in terms of dealing with different peoples? Can you say there's certain universals you've discovered across civilizations on how to effectively communicate across that barrier?
Although Kipling says that the West is the West and the East is the East, and they will never meet. But to my experience, they meet, and they should meet, because we are human beings, and the necessities of the daily living push us to have this dialogue and to get in touch with each other and to try to solve any problem or any dispute between us through the dialogue. And there is no big differences between peoples. The values are the values everywhere. The values are the values in all the religions of the world. And even in the other, I don't like to say it, it is not religions, but beliefs, like Buddhism or Confucianism and all this. The values are the values, starting from the pharaonic days, which they put it, don't steal, don't kill, don't lie, this and that. It is the same values. So there is a base to build on it, to have better relations, human relations. To my assessment, who is behind all these big problem are the fanatics, fanatism. And fanatism generates fanatism. It's obvious. So we should stop this fanatism by explaining our values, our way of thinking, our views to the different peoples.
And you mean that this fanaticism can arise among all peoples? Every group can have its representative fanatics? Is that
the fanatism is part of the human beings. Fanatism is part of human beings. But fortunately enough, it is minority. It's easy to face them if you put your hand on them, if you know how to face them. Not to face them by, to my assessment, by killing, by burning embassies, or by killing tourists, and by killing this or that, or by more violence. No, through dialogue. Through dialogue. You can convince them easily. You can convince them. If you cannot convince them, you can just leave them.
Well, sometimes people say that when you're talking about a dialogue and the two parties don't have equal weight or equal power, that it can make the dialogue very difficult. So maybe one is speaking with a loudspeaker and the other is whispering, is an analogy you sometimes hear. Now, I've heard that Amr Musa, who's the Secretary General of the Arab League, has called for launching a strategic development program across the Arab world for modernization in an effort to, I suppose, establish a more effective collective power, a more independence. Do you think this kind of effort is necessary with the task in mind of being able to talk to other civilizations to get over some of the difficult issues?
I think it is vital and it's very important to try to, I don't like to say to educate, but to orientate the peoples, the masses, of the dangerous which is behind all this, maneuvers and conspiracies which is happening. Once you clarified all this, you're going to improve their point of view, and they're going to act in a different way, to my assessment.
Well, this is interesting. I often wonder, what some of the barriers are that are preventing this. And you mentioned in the reference to this idea of development and modernization that you have to help bring the people to a certain level, perhaps with education. What do you think are some of the barriers that exist within the Muslim world that may be a contributing factor to the failure to communicate our message to the world?
You can jump on these barriers. Don't let them stop you. Through the canals like yours, for instance, who are trying to get in touch with the public opinion in the West, trying to orientate them, to clarify the real Islam, what is the real Islam is. And on the local level, we can do the same thing, introducing the other. They are not all of them, they are not fanatics, they are not trying to destroy the Islamic civilization or to try to distort the image of Islam. It is, mutual on the two levels, abroad and locally.
When you've worked, especially in the West, I know you've worked in Europe, do you find that the people you're working with at a diplomatic level, are they fundamentally hostile towards Islam in your experience? Is the problem more misunderstanding? Or are there just maybe contested values between the interests of Muslims and some of their interests? What can you tell us about this is not a world that most of us have access to. What can you tell us about the relationships you've had with the people you've worked with, especially in the West?
To my assessment, in the West, within the atmosphere of freedom, of expression, freedom of thinking, freedom of reading, freedom of seeing, all this atmosphere of freedom, they can listen to you easily if you know how to approach them through the right way. It's easy to convince them. That's why there are many Europeans who are now joining the Islam religion when they know, when they discover the reality of the Islam and how it is. And you can imagine the demonstrations, the big demonstrations, which were in millions in Europe against the war in Iraq, against the United States, and its war on Iraq. This it shows you that you can affect the public opinion easily affect the public opinion in the European countries if you know how to approach them, if you know how to introduce yourself to them, introduce your beliefs, your real situations to them. It's easy to be closer to them.
Ambassador, you speak with the wisdom of vast experience, and it's interesting to hear this information. We were talking about some of your experiences working in the West as a diplomat representing Egypt. One of the interesting positions you had where you were stationed, in terms of where you were stationed, was Denmark, which of course has been a major focus in recent months in the Muslim world. What was your experience living in Denmark? I think you mentioned to me that you lived there for 4 years.
Yes.
And what was your experience there with the people in general? Unfortunately, we have to take a brief break, so we'll come back after the break and we'll get back to these issues, inshallah. Please stay with us. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
The more you hear about it, the more you desire to prepare for it. Life after death. Journey of the soul. The day of resurrection. The torment of the hellfire. The reward of paradise. Stay tuned for a life-changing, heart-softening, spiritually uplifting series about the hereafter exclusively on Peace TV.
Know the vivid descriptions of paradise and hellfire from the Quran and authentic ahadith, and acquire life-changing habits to be successful in the hereafter. Every Tuesday at 6 p.m. and repeat telecast at 5:30 a.m. Saudi Arabia on Peace TV.
A friendly message by Dr. Zakir. Win over your enemy.
In this age of hatred and animosity, our all-loving Creator has prescribed the formula for winning over your enemy in the glorious Quran, in Surah Fussilat, chapter 41, verse number 34. Nor can goodness and evil be equal. Repel evil with what is better. You will see that he with whom you had enmity will become your close friend. Do not defeat your enemies, but rather win them over. Win their hearts and win their minds.
Peace TV, the solution for humanity.
اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق خلق الإنسان من علق.
The Book of Allah is the foundation of Islamic civilization and the way out of every trial. Every generation of Muslims needs to develop a relationship with the Quran. So join me, Riaz Ansari, for reflections on the Quran.
Explore how the Quran has a wondrous impact on those who receive it as a book of guidance in Reflections on the Quran with Riaz Ansari, next on Peace TV.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Perspectives. Our guest today is Ambassador Mohammed Osama Abdul Muttalib. He's a member of the Egyptian Council for Foreign Affairs and a very experienced diplomat. Before the break, we were talking about some of your experiences working in the West as a diplomat representing Egypt. One of the interesting positions you had where you were stationed, in terms of where you were stationed, was Denmark, which of course has been a major focus in recent months in the Muslim world. What was your experience living in Denmark? I think you mentioned to me that you lived there for 4 years.
Yes.
And what was your experience there with the people in general?
With the Danes, or the Danish people, it was a very nice experience. Anywhere you can find fanatics. Anytime you can find, people who are trying to find conspiracies and plots to destruct relations. We are living in a very complicated, very complex world. But my experience in Denmark, it was very, very impressive to me and to my family, not only to me. The Danes are very friendly people in general. I've never seen two Danes fighting each other. Believe me, I've never seen it during these 4 years. They can, be and agree with each other, but can't reach to a fight between them. The safety, the security there is unbelievable. That's why what happened, to my assessment, to my experience, is something exceptional. And misinterpretation of the freedom of expression and a conspiracy. I'm not for this theory of conspiracy or this and that, but this is what happened. In my view, there are people who try to make problems between not only West and East, but Islam and the West, trying to image of Islam after 9/11, after 7/7 in London, after this accident of trains in Madrid, this consecutive accidents. They try to manipulate them to serve their own interest. That's why we should be, smart enough not to let them exploit these problems to try to distort the image of Islam more and more. Of course, we should demonstrate, we should condemn, we should deplore, we refuse completely any distortion or any disrespect to our Prophet ﷺ, his image. We don't accept this. This is completely unacceptable. But to a certain extent, we don't like to give them the excuse or the proof that these people are not civilized. They are, these are terrorism. These are terrorists. Look what they are doing, burning embassies, killing here and there, trying to threat the tourists. We don't like to give them the opportunity to exploit this against us. This is the smartness which we should have.
Well, you've certainly seen the situation from both sides in terms of being with the people in Denmark, of course representing the Muslim world. The UN Secretary General Kofi Annan declared or established an international committee to promote dialogue between the Islamic civilization and the Western civilization. Do you think that this kind of project can succeed, particularly within an institution like the UN? Can the UN play a positive role in this kind of a dialogue?
I don't think that the UN can play a role, only maybe in financing or trying to arrange. But the best way is that you gather the two sides together. If they are not able to come to us, we go to them. If they are not, if we are not able to go to them, they let them come to us, talk and dialogue with them and show them the Islam. And there is one more point of criticism as a Muslim. I'm a good believer, very good believer. I made my Hajj twice, so I'm a very good believer, alhamdulillah. So that's why I'm speaking objectively about this problem. For instance, one of the negative images for the Muslims are the Muslims communities in the West. They are not up to the level, unfortunately. I don't mean that all of them, but many of them, they are not up the level. They are closed. They don't like to mingle with the society. They are living within their own, barriers. This is very negative points, very negative image. It gives negative image of the Muslim, the real Muslims. The real Muslims who invaded the world, not by the sword, but by his belief, by his conducts, by his behaviors, by his style of living. That's why we reached far away out till China and India, not by the sword, but by the good Muslim, as an example for the Islam. This is a negative point, speaking it, frankly.
It's important always that we turn the criticism inward. As, self-renewal, self-purification can be difficult, but it's the thing that we have the most control over. So it's important to hear these kind of criticisms.
To declare it and to admit that we are facing this problem. So we should, try to correct it, to reform it.
Well, let me ask you a different question. You've served for years in diplomacy representing Egypt throughout the world, but we live in a very unique era right now after the events of September 11th, of course, and what has followed from that. We live in a time of increased tension. If you were to assume a new diplomatic post somewhere in the West, North America, Europe, what would be some of the first steps you would take to try to alleviate this crisis? What are some of the strategies you would use?
The same strategy that I was, following during all my career, to be in touch with the people I'm living with. This is very important, to give them a good example of a Muslim keeping my beliefs. I don't leave them at all for anything. And to give them a good image of the good Muslim, of the good representative, and to dialogue with them, to try to correct the wrong beliefs about Islam, about our way of living, that's why we are acting this way, why we are reacting this way.
Well, we're running out of time for this episode, but I want to ask you one final question just to sum it up. Do you think ultimately that the dialogue of civilizations can overcome the idea of a conflict of civilizations?
There is no, to my view, there is no conflict of civilization. On the contrary, there is a continuity of civilization. For instance, we started by the Egyptian civilization. It delivered to the Greek civilization, the Roman, until the Western civilization of today. So there is no conflict, on the contrary. And each, civilization, it gets benefit of the previous one. Which means that thanks to the Arab civilization, the Western civilization flourished. We all remember the presence of the Arabs in Andalusia, in the south of Spain. Thanks to this connection with the Arab world, Europe started to get out of the darkness and then start to flourish.
Ambassador, this is a good point to end on. I like the comment of continuity of civilizations. This is an important lesson for us to remember. Our guest today has been Ambassador Mohammed Osama Abdul Muttalib. He's a member of the Egyptian Council of Foreign Affairs and an experienced diplomat. I want to thank you, Ambassador, for joining us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It was a great pleasure for me.
Thank you. Please stay tuned for future episodes. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.